So we have the familiar story today in the gospel reading of doubting Thomas, right? Of Thomas who is not present when the disciples are gathered, when Jesus first appears to them, and then a week later he is with them, and he has said that I'm not going to believe unless I can put my finger in his nail marks and put my hand into his side, right? That he has a very high bar for what he says he will believe. I'd like to focus, though, a little bit on the reading or the story that we have from the gospel in one detail that could easily be overlooked. I think that detail is that a week later, Thomas was still with them, right? Thomas had a witness of the risen Jesus given to him by the disciples that he was a member of, and essentially he says to them, I don't believe you or you're lying, right? But they don't reject him. They don't kick him out. They don't move him to the side or exclude him because of that. He's still with them a week later. And Thomas, for his part, doesn't turn away, doesn't stay away, remains where he belongs with the community of disciples, even though he has these big doubts about Jesus' resurrection, right? He doesn't believe their witness. And so it's an important fact to kind of think about because he is where he belongs, even with the questions and the doubts and the accusation in some sense that he's making. I've shared sometimes, some years ago, a story about when I was in college, and you all remember that being in college, I was kind of on fire for my faith at one point. I was engaged in a lot of things. I was doing a lot of different ministries and Bible studies, and I had gone on a retreat called Teens Encountering Christ in most of the world at the Academy because we had 20-somethings too. They called it Together Encountering Christ. And the year after I went on the retreat, I was on the retreat team. And I had a friend of mine that was struggling with his faith, right? So we were very, very close friends. My best friend at the Academy at the time, and he was struggling with his faith, and so I was encouraging him to go on this retreat. Like, this is a wonderful thing. It was wonderful for me. It really enlivened my relationship with Jesus. It'll be great for you. And so he agreed, a little reluctantly, but he agreed to go on the retreat. And on the retreat, we had a lot of conversations. And one of those conversations went until 3 a.m., where we were talking about God's existence and how you can know God and all those kinds of things. And at the end of that conversation, he committed to being an agnostic. See how successful I am? That's where just leads right into the priesthood. He committed to being, I can't know if God exists or not, right? I don't know. I can't know. And I was heartbroken, right? I was crestfallen because of that, and I didn't know how to treat him. Now, this is my best friend. How are we going to relate? What are we going to connect on? What are the things that are going to be part of that relationship, that friendship? And so I went to our little room we had designated as a chapel, and I was sitting there, and I was actually kind of pondering and very distraught about this. And one of my classmates, actually, I saw her again when I was out at my 30th class reunion in October, but she comes in, Charlene, and she said, well, what's wrong? And I tell her the whole story, right? And I said, I don't know what to do. What do I do now? And her response to me that has resonated through my life was just love him. Just love him, right? That you're still his friend. You're still there with him. And I took that to heart. Regrettably, he didn't stay connected. He disconnected, right? But I was always there as his friend to show him love. I think something similar probably happened with the disciples, right? Thomas said he doesn't believe us. What do we do now? How do we treat Thomas? And somebody probably said, we just love him. We just love him. And so he was there in the midst of the community a week later. He was still connected to his friends and fellow disciples. He was still in that community where he belonged. And he encountered in the midst of that community Jesus Christ. So that took some humility on Thomas's part, some willingness to stay connected, to be open to the possibility of encountering Jesus, whom he did not believe had risen from the dead, to be connected in that community. So it is a two-way street in some sense between that individual who is turned away and the community that accepted him. but it brought about the beautiful scene where Thomas himself declares, "My Lord and my God," that he encountered Jesus and came to believe in him. Our community is designed for that as well. That's the way God has formed his church, to be able to be the body of believers journeying through this world that welcomes all, and in the midst of that, in the midst of the community life, helps us each to encounter Jesus Christ. Another detail from the readings is that both times Jesus has appeared, where were they? Locked in a room, right? They were locked in a room. Now, our doors were open this morning, right? Our doors were open, but a lot of us come here this morning with doors of our hearts locked. We have been hurt, or we've been betrayed, or we have questions or doubts ourselves, or we're insecure or have anxieties, right? We come here with those doors of our hearts locked. In the midst of our community, Jesus still comes to be with us. He still comes through those locked doors to enter into our hearts, to enter into our lives, to be here with us in this Eucharist, in the midst of those who are gathered together who believe, and some who question, and some who doubt. But Jesus always shows up. He always comes to be with us through those locked doors. As we come here together in this Eucharist, and as we celebrate the great gift of faith in the sacrament of baptism this morning, we know that God enters into our lives, and that wherever we are, this is where we belong. This is where we are meant to be this morning. That this is where God, in the midst of our community, comes to be with each of us.